Welcome to WCAT Radio and TV. I'm your host, Kiki Latimer, and author of Home for the Homily, amongst several other books. And today I have with us Roger Skrenes, who's going to talk about his very interesting book, Signs of Resurrection. And so welcome to the show. And Roger, if you could start us off with a prayer, that would be wonderful.
Or just a little small one. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Glory be to the Father, to the Son, to the Holy Spirit, as it was now, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
Amen.
Son,
Thank
Holy
you.
Spirit.
Okay. Well, welcome to the Catholic Bookworm.
Well, thank you. Well, nice to meet you. so far away. Where are you exactly?
I'm in Rhode Island.
Oh, Rhode Island.
I'm in southern part of Rhode Island, out in the boonies here, Hope Valley.
Wow.
And you are on the other side of the country.
Yeah. We're being rained on pretty heavy out here.
Yes. So whereabouts in California are you?
I'm in Irvine, which is it's in Orange County, a suburb of Los Angeles.
Yes. So you're getting plenty of rain.
Oh yeah, we got 7.5 inches of rain this month, which is half of what we get on the whole year.
Yeah. What a crazy weather system. Yeah. Been
But
watching the weather.
Yeah, it hasn't really been a big problem though, because it seems like it rains and then it stops raining for a little while and then it rains again. It gives the ground time to absorb the water, so. It's pretty nice, actually.
You've needed rain for so long.
Oh, we really need it. I mean, the big reservoirs are filling up, which is wonderful. I just thank some friends up in Northern California for providing my drinking water for next summer, because we were getting down to the bottom of the bathtub, so to speak,
Yeah. Well, it's certainly a sign of resurrection. We need water. You folks definitely need water out there. You're a desert.
Yes. Yeah. Parched land is a sign of death, and rain is a sign of resurrection. I always say that God is baptizing the world, So anyway, this book, like I was saying, is an unusual book because I didn't start out writing a book called Signs of Resurrection. This is back in the 90s, and I started seeing models, like incidents that look like death, and then there would be the complement of resurrection. For example, like you get sick for 3 days or 4 days, maybe the doctor gives you an antibiotic, and 3 or 4 days later you're up on your feet. So you have the sickness was a sign of death, and being back on your feet again is a sign of resurrection. So I kept seeing these things. I don't know, they just keep occurring to me. And so one day I said, well, maybe I should write these things down. So I wrote down every time I had a different insight. I wrote it down on an 8x11 piece of paper, and I put it all in a folder. And it went on I have roughly in the book about 100 of these signs of death and resurrection. Actually, about 75 of those and about 25 other things, which I'll talk somewhat about. But it ended up, then I realized that what I was getting at was that I see in our world that there's a lot of evidence for resurrection that God has put into creation, and aside from his own resurrection, you know what I mean?
Right.
And so I decided to call the book Signs of Resurrection, and I organized it. I have matter in the first chapter, and then there's it shows there's a section on how plants evidence signs of resurrection, and then how animals evidence signs of resurrection, how man evidences signs of resurrection. And the last chapter is on Christ himself. It's an insight into resurrection in the New Testament itself. So that's how the book got to be written. I could start giving you some examples if you like.
Well, of course, most people's favorite is always the butterfly. The caterpillar.
I use that as the cover. See, it's Can I get that all in there?
Oh, that's nice.
That's the
Yeah, I
new,
haven't seen, I've read the book. I mean, I've looked through the book. I loved it. And, but mine was an electronic copy, so I didn't get to see the cover.
oh,
So
yeah,
it's-
that they did this. Well, they had one before that, and I asked them to change it because I wanted it very distinct. Because the butterfly, I mean, the caterpillar body of a butterfly is not just a blob. There's a mouth, there's eyes,
Can you
digestive
hold it up a
tract.
little bit more?
Oh, sure.
There we
I wish
go.
I could. I wish I could the whole thing, but just there's only a part of. Can you see all that?
Yeah, yeah. Very
Oh, I see. I
nice.
can get back a little further, then you can see it better.
Yeah.
But there's 100 different kinds of butterflies, at least the species.
Yeah.
And they all go through this, and the caterpillar is a very distinct body and structure. And then in a short, and then they weave this structure around themselves, chrysalis, and it's like a casket. It's kind of like a tomb. And then in a few small amount of time, they transform into a butterfly, which is an incredible thing when you think about it.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
When my children were little, when we were homeschooling, we would look for monarch butterfly eggs.
Yeah.
And then we would feed them the milkweed leaves, and then we would watch them go into the chrysalis for a couple of weeks. And it was just an amazing thing to see them come out, a butterfly.
Yeah. Well, it's I guess I'd like to start, if we're going to go through the book, I'd like to start at the beginning and with matter, because an awful lot of people in the world today are materialists. They basically believe that everything is matter, and that's all there is. There isn't anything you can't see. There isn't any spiritual things. There isn't any angels. Everything is just about matter. And when we leave behind our bodies, that's the end of it. The story is over. So I'd like to just go into a couple things I have in my book, and I start with atoms, because everything in the universe, everything that we know in the world is made out of atoms. So the story goes something like this. About 1850, 150 years ago, we knew nothing about atoms, nothing about the atom, zero. I mean, they thought it was like a billiard ball. That was all. They didn't know anything about it. And then along came James Clerk Maxwell in 1864, and he was a mathematical physicist, and he wrote 4 equations that explained that electricity and magnetism were 2 sides of the same thing. And he also, in his calculations, realized that light was an electromagnetic wave. That was 1864. And then in 1897, we have Thomson in England discovering the electron. That's the first particle in an atom that we knew about, the electron. And 7 or 8 years later, in 1905, Einstein said that light was not just a wave, but it was a particle. It was the photon particle. And he got a Nobel Prize in 1921 for that paper. He wrote other papers in that year. It was an amazing year of things that he discovered. But the photoelectric effect was what I'm talking about. And then, but still, nobody knew really what the structure of that the atom was. That's all they knew at that time. But in 1911, Rutherford, a scientist from New Zealand who was working in England with a couple of graduate students, they did an experiment, the gold leaf experiment. I'm sure you've heard of it. You know what aluminum foil is. Yeah. They took gold atoms and made a foil structure like aluminum foil, and then they decided to shoot small particles radiated from like particles that came from radium, or alpha particles was what the name that they used of the particles, and they shot them through this gold foil, and they expected maybe the gold foil would just stop the radiated particles, but actually they were shocked. all the particles went straight through the gold foil, hardly hit anything. Every once in a while, one would veer off to the left or one would veer off to the right. And very rarely, one would come right back at him. It would hit one of the gold atoms directly and come right back at him. And Rutherford, from this experiment, postulated that the atom consisted of a small nucleus, very small nucleus. Actually, the atom, he said, was mostly empty space, and it is. It's mostly empty space. But in the very center is a small positively charged nucleus. If you compare this with a football field, on the center of the football field at the 50-yard line, you'd have a structure about the size of a tennis ball. That's your nucleus. And then flying around way up in the stands are electron particles that are flying at the speed of light, so that the entire structure of the atom, circular structure of the atom, looks like a cloud. Not like it's not like planets going around the sun, but like a cloud. And that's where they were in 1911. Then, but they had a problem. I mean, the electrons were negatively charged. The center of the atom was positively charged. What prevented them from coming together? And 2 years later, Niels Bohr, a Danish scientist, figured out that the electrons were going in orbits. And when an electron changed orbits to a higher energy orbit, it gave off the photon particle that Einstein was talking about in 1905. And the photon particle turns out to be not having no mass. It's a massless particle. You got to think into that. It exists, but it has no mass. You can picture that. In fact, even though I'm talking about these things and scientists talk about them a lot more, we know very little about it, even with all the talk. You know what I mean? It's very mysterious. In other words, if you tried, couldn't, if you could pull out a photon and put it on a scale, you couldn't weigh it. It has no mass. It doesn't really occupy space in the sense that we think of space. So it's a very mysterious thing. And the reason I mention this is not just because I want to do an exercise in the history of science, but because when we talk about a massless particle like a photon, we're beginning to sound like we're talking about the soul. When we talk about a soul, that you have a soul and I have a soul, we don't expect that we could just reach in and pull it out, take a look at it, put it back in. You know what I mean? Or when I die, my body's laying dead on the bed, I look like a blob of tissue, and we say, well, his soul's already left the body, which is what ancient people said, soul has left the body. But you can't expect to find the soul or see the soul or weigh the soul. It's like a massless particle. Okay. So then the next step in this story is 1919. 1919. Rutherford has figured out that the center of an atom, the nucleus, is made up of proton particles. And the smallest atom in the universe is the hydrogen atom, and it only has one proton particle. But he realized that all the other particles were made inside of stars. They're furnaces where you can slap elements with more than one proton particle together with other elements and make larger, even less. Let me give you an example. The second element in the periodic table is helium, which has two proton particles. Now, if you want to make a carbon atom, which has 6 proton particles, and our body has about 20 pounds of carbon in it, if you want to make a carbon atom, you slap together 3 helium atoms. Each has 2 proton particles, and all 3 together, they're slapped together inside this furnace. The star, is extremely heavy, a hot center of a star, now you'll have an atom with 6 proton particles, which is a carbon atom. If you want to make oxygen, which we're breathing right now as we talk, you slap together 4 helium atoms, and you'll have oxygen, which has 8 protons. And you go on right up the periodic table. Every atom has a certain number of proton particles. For example, iron has 27 proton particles, and the largest element in the periodic table, uranium, naturally occurring element, has 92 proton particles. So in 1919, we knew that the hydrogen atom had 1 proton particle, and that the proton was the second particle in an atom. And now you're beginning to get a little better picture of the one atom, the structure of one atom. A student at Rutherford his name was Chadwick. In 1932, he discovered the second particle in the nucleus, which was a neutron. He called it the neutron because it was neutrally charged. It had no charge. The proton had a plus charge, but the neutron had no charge, so he called it the neutron. Then we fast forward 30 years to 1964, and at California Institute of Technology, Caltech, which is about 30 miles from where I'm sitting, there was a scientist there, Murray Gell-Mann was his name, and he worked with some complicated mathematics and predicted that the proton particle really was made up of 3 other particles, which he named quarks. He invented the name Quarks. I think I got the spelling right. Anyway, he also said that the neutron particle was made up of 3 quarks too. And that was confirmed about 5 years later at Stanford University they have a linear accelerator up there, and they were able to confirm that Gell-Mann was right. The next thing I want to mention is what happened in 1979 in Hamburg, Germany. There's a laboratory there where they discovered gluon particles. Now, the gluon particles are what make the quarks hold together inside of a proton particle. You get the idea? We're getting complicated here, but I'm almost done. I'm not going to go too much further. The gluon particle also holds the quarks together in a neutron particle. This is all going on inside the nucleus of an atom, that tennis ball shaped thing on the 50-yard line of an atom. Now, the interesting thing about gluons is that they are a massless particle too. They have no mass. Think about it. We're talking about the same kind of thing, a little different than the photon, but it's a massless particle. You cannot weigh it. Its shape doesn't have a shape that you can pull out and measure it, find out how wide it is, how high it is, how deep it is. It's not like a normal piece of matter, but it does exist. And so now you've got an atom. Every atom in the universe, every atom in our body, that on the nucleus has at least one massless particle holding it together. This is, by the way, the strong nuclear force in an atom. The gluons constitute the strong nuclear force, which is, if you see an atomic bomb explosion like Hiroshima, well, that force is released. Anyway, this massless particle in the nucleus and the massless particle in the electrons going around orbiting at the outside of the atom. You have these 2 massless particles in every atom in the universe that look very much like when we talk about the soul. It has existence, it doesn't have mass. Very interesting, don't you think? When I was a young man, I was very curious about the 15th chapter of Paul's letter to the Corinthians. He wrote this letter in 53 AD, 20 years after the resurrection. He had started a community in Corinth, and he was talking about our resurrection, the resurrection of human beings. And he used the terminology, the phrase spiritual body. But I never knew, I was always curious, what does he mean by spiritual body? You know what I mean? I know what I got. This body I know about. I'm not sure I know what a spiritual body is. And he never said it. He didn't know it himself, but he had the insight to coin this notion, this idea. Well, 50 years, about roughly 50 years ago, I got an answer for what the spiritual body was like. In the 1970s, by the 1970s, medical science had a lot of tools that they could use to help revive human beings who had died. You know, they had the heart-lung machine. They had an electrical device that would shock the heart, make it beat again, start it beating again. They had liquid oxygen that they could give people 100% oxygen to try to get their breathing going again. There are other things that they had. And so about in the 1970s, we have the very interesting thing happening. And this happened earlier in history, but it was so rare that nobody paid much attention to it, or they thought that whoever said that they had died and come back to life, that they were kind of kooky. You know what I mean? You don't really take them seriously. But doctors had to start taking things seriously, because what happened is, you know, they had examples of people who were dead for 5 minutes and they revived them. They were dead for 15 minutes and they revived them. They were dead for 30 minutes and they revived them. They were dead for an hour and they revived them, and actually longer than periods than an hour even. So the question became in the 70s, with not just a few or a couple, but hundreds and actually thousands of cases like this. And now it's into the tens of thousands. And the question is, where were they and what were they doing during the time they were dead? See, I'll give you an example. Let's say a woman's lying on an operating table and she dies. She literally dies. Her heart no longer beats. She no longer is breathing. And when they have her hooked up to an electroencephalogram, there's a straight line. There's no electrical message from the brain. The brain is dead, and it's not putting out any electrical signal. So, you know, this goes on for a few minutes. The doctor comes in and signs the death certificate and says they're dead. You know, that's it. But they keep trying, and since about the 70s, they put a lot of effort into reviving people that are clinically dead. They're not breathing. Their heart's not pumping blood, and their brain is not working. So the question is, though, they have these thousands of cases, and so the situation is like this lady lying on an operating table. She dies, and the doctors know she's dead. And so what happens to her? Well, she'll tell you. She comes out of her body. She's 5 feet above the operating table. She's looking down at the doctors and the nurses trying to revive her, get her body working again, her physical body. And then she goes through the walls of the surgical room, surgical theater, and through the walls of the hospital. And she's outside and she sees this light in a distance, a very bright light, which everybody that's experienced this says it's God. And she starts walking in that direction. And while she's walking in that direction, aunts, uncles, maybe her mother and dad who have died, friends who have passed on, come and greet her, you know? And then somewhere in the process, she gets a kind of like a video run of her life story. And but she doesn't go far enough to stay permanently. She comes back. And some of the ladies that came back were revived said that they were sent back. They felt they were sent back because they had unraised children. They had young children who were yet unraised and needed a mother, so to speak. One case I wrote a chapter on this in one of my books. One case was where a young lady was in her teenage years and she got killed in an accident, and she's walking toward this light, and this young man comes up to her and says, "I'm your brother." And it's amazing story. Anyway, this little boy had died before she was born. And then she was born, so the parents didn't tell her that she had a little brother who had died before she was born. They didn't want to disturb her, so they never told her that she had a brother. Another example was there was a lady who came back, and she was so she couldn't believe that all this had happened to her, and she kept telling the nurse, and the nurse was getting ticked off. The nurse wasn't a believer, and she thought this woman was just a kook. And so finally, the lady, the patient who had been revived, pulled the nurse over and said, "Look, I want you to do something for me. I want you to walk down the hall, take the elevator up to the 3rd floor, then walk down that hall, and you'll find a big window, and it overlooks the roof. And about 2/3 of the way across the roof, you'll see a red tennis shoe. Just one. There's only one." And she did that, of course, and the nurse found out the lady was telling the truth. She had been there. She had gone through. She had seen it from above, you know. So what I'm trying to say here is now we got massless particles in every atom in the universe, including every atom in our body. We have a very deep insight, I think, into the structure or the reality of the soul. And now we have examples of what Paul knew was true, but he couldn't prove it at his time, that we have a spiritual body, that we're not just hanging loose. So these, by the way, the second one I have in my book, I called it short-term death, I think. I think I called it short-term death. Yeah, short-term death. I didn't call it, sometimes you'll see it referred to as out-of-body consciousness. Sometimes they refer to it as near-death experiences. There are whole books written by scientists on this subject. This is not just, an untrained.
There was a well-known one there was a neuroscientist who died.
Yeah, there's one in Harvard University that, not died. Yeah, well, that's right. He had this near-death experience and became a
near-death experience, and he was clinically dead, and he came back and he wrote about what happened.
Right. I know what you're referring to. I can't remember the title of the book, but actually, but that's just one of them. There are a number of them out there. If you Google it, you'll see. But anyway, these are 2 examples from my book of the 100. And I think they're important because a lot of there are too many people running around that think that material things are not as real, and things that we can't see, like souls, spirits, and so forth, are less real. And I'll give you another example. This is in my section on matter. James Clerk Maxwell wrote these 4 differential equations, and he said that the wavelength of electromagnetic wavelength was very small at one end, and the wavelength of the electromagnetic wavelength was very large at the other end. Well, you know the story. They found Röntgen in Germany found out that the very short wavelengths of electromagnetic wavelength, it was X-rays, what we call today X-rays, and of course we have X-ray machines. And then Marconi and other people too, but Marconi was one of them, who used the large wavelengths, as large as a room, which we now call radio waves, to send. He used them to send dots and dashes across the Atlantic Ocean, and he got that far. He actually started off with just a mile away, but within a few years, 4 or 5 years, he was doing it across the North Atlantic from Europe to North America. And today, right now, as we're talking, we're sending messages, and this is very mysterious. I mean, we're talking about electromagnetic radiation, and yet you're looking at me and I'm looking at you. Around us are a lot of people. We can't see them. They're being carried in electromagnetic radio waves. Now, what does that mean? I mean, I'm asking you. I mean, Miss Scientist, tell me what a radio wave is doing carrying a personality like a news reporter. Right. Or a speech from the president or from the Pope over there in Rome. How's that being done? I mean, how do you explain that in ordinary terms, in matter terms? See, it's very mysterious stuff we're talking about here. There's another one I want to talk about with you. And then I'll get off this kick because I've been thinking about this. I might write a book about this stuff. But anyway, water. When I wrote a book on the Trinity, and I did models of the Trinity, something like 75 models of the Trinity in everyday life around us. One of the models I used was water. And I remember somebody said, "You can't compare the Trinity with water. Are you crazy?" Well, I think you can. And I'll just briefly tell you, you got ice is like God the Father, started staying in one place and anchoring things. And you got running water like Jesus. He's out in the world all over the place, running, doing things. And then you've got water that's invisible in air around us. We call it humidity. And that's the Holy Spirit. Now, a lot of people think that steam in a bathroom is gaseous water. It isn't. Steam in a bathroom is liquid water. The water I'm talking about is in the room right around you. We say that the air is holding 25%. It has humidity of 25%. That means it's only holding 25% of the water it can hold. But all around us, all over this planet, water in the form of steam is invisible, and it's around us all the time. So that's the Holy Spirit. So then I was thinking in this book here, I used water as a sign of death and resurrection. You have, liquid water, and then it becomes slushy. It gets cold and it starts becoming slushy. It's like liquid water is like the summer season. Fall season would be less slushy water. Winter time comes, the water is frozen. Springtime comes, water is thawed again, and it's running again. Yeah. So you have a sign of death at wintertime. And I grew up in Wisconsin, and we talked about the dead of winter. It's the dead of winter, and we meant it. You look around and the ground is covered with ice and snow, and it's cold, and it is the dead of winter. That means December, January, and February, essentially, And then spring comes and everything starts growing again, and everything springs up. It's a sign of resurrection. Well, I want to just talk about water in terms of this mysterious thing we call resurrection. We know that if you're 100-pound woman, and a lot of women who aren't overweight are around 100 pounds. If you're a 100-pound woman, 70 pounds of your weight is water. 70 pounds of your body weight is water, H2O. You have two hydrogen atoms hooked together, one oxygen atom, that's the water molecule. So we know where the oxygen atom comes from. It's made inside of stars, where, like I said, you could take 4 helium atoms, each having 2 protons, slap them together, and you'd have an oxygen atom with 8 protons. Most of the elements that we have on a periodic table were created inside of stars. But what about hydrogen? Hydrogen exists. It only has 1 proton. You don't make hydrogen in stars. Hydrogen, which makes up about if you're a 100-pound woman and you have 70 pounds of water, you have about 9 pounds of hydrogen atoms in that water that we're talking about in your body. Those atoms were made in the Big Bang by God himself. And you might say, I can just see some physicists saying, "Oh, you can't say that. You can't say that." No, you can say that, because why can you say that? Well, from nothing comes nothing. There's a principle. You can't make hydrogen atoms out of nothing. From nothing comes nothing. Hydrogen atoms have to be made by a super powerful being who's not in the universe, not in the created universe. He's outside the universe. And those hydrogen atoms make up today about, I think they estimate around 90% of the atoms in the whole universe today, right now as we talk, are hydrogen atoms. those atoms had to be made by God himself in the Big Bang. Not necessarily in the first few minutes, but somewhere in the very early stages of the Big Bang, 13.8 billion years ago, he had to make those atoms. And those atoms, those hydrogen atoms, are in your body. You're walking around. You're evidence of the Big Bang, walking around with those hydrogen atoms in you, created by God himself. You know, we say that God is a long ways away. He seems so far away. Well, we're not only carrying hydrogen atoms that are in water. Hydrogen atoms are in proteins, they're in carbohydrates, and they're in fats. They're all over our body. And so we're walking evidence that God does his work and does it very well. I mean, that was 13.8 billion years ago, you know. So this is another very mysterious thing that as a sign of resurrection. It's a sign of resurrection in our life. So anyway, those are a couple of things I wanted to mention at the beginning. Now that's in the first part of my book. There's other examples of things in the first part of the book. We're not going to have time to go into them, but then I like, for example, here's one that I like. We see this every single day. This is all about, I call it sunrise. Can you see it?
Yes, sunrise.
Yeah, you have this on the left side. You have the sunshine in an ordinary day, like it right now. We're getting sun today here in Los Angeles, and it looks beautiful. And then about 5 o'clock or about 4 o'clock, the sun is going down. You see the little boy watching the sun go down. In the second picture, it's like the fall season, so to speak, in the year. And then the sun is gone and it's dark, and that's a sign of death. And then the next morning, guess what? The sun is back. It's a sign of resurrection, right? Now, God has given us that sign of death and resurrection, darkness and light, 365 times a year. You don't think he's trying to tell us something? I mean, that's just another one on my sheet here. I have a couple of them that I do on that because it's so profound. This one here is on shows you the position, what looks like the position of the sun as it rises and then sets and then disappears. It's just a different way of looking at things. And then, of course, the real truth is that the sun doesn't rise or fall. The earth is just turning toward the sun or turning away from the sun. If it's turned toward the sun, we got daylight. And if it's turned away from the sun, we got darkness. So it's a very profound thing that we experience all the time. We don't think that much about it. Okay. So if you have any questions, I'm done with the first part of the book here. Actually, there's a lot more in it but the second part of the book has to do with plants. And since how much time have we used up so far? Do you know?
Probably about a half hour. I'm trying to think. We started maybe quarter after.
Oh yeah.
You know, we had a funny situation here I worked in Cromwell, Connecticut at the seminary, and we had we have a lot of Vietnamese that come, and there was a group of Vietnamese nuns that came during the winter time, and they saw all these dead trees.
Oh yeah.
And they wrote home that there must have been some kind of ecological disaster in the area because every tree in the area was dead.
They had no leaves on it.
No leaves on it, dead trees, and
deciduous trees.
Very strange. They didn't know what had happened, but they were sure something had happened because, of course, they don't have spring, summer, winter, fall in Vietnam. And they were just
that is really funny.
And they said in the spring they were utterly amazed in the spring to see these trees
come back to life,
start blooming with flowers and leaves, and it was just shocking to them to see that. Yeah.
Well, actually, I have one of my sheets on the part with the plants is about that topic. I don't know. Can you see that?
Yep, the leaves.
It starts on the left side with with the summer, the trees full of leaves, you know, and then you get in the fall, the leaves start turning colors and dropping off the plant, and then in wintertime, the leaves are all gone. I think they're all gone. Yeah.
It really is an amazing process to
Oh, it
see.
is.
You know, it's winter here now, and I look out there, and it's just hard to believe that, you know, in a few months, everything will be green again.
Yeah, actually, yeah, there's the resurrection part right here.
Yeah. And it does, springtime definitely, especially if you live in areas that get a really hard winter. Springtime
Absolutely.
really feels
Really,
like
yeah,
resurrection.
it's very clear, isn't it? Yeah, here in Los Angeles, you know, I've been here since, I don't know, I've been here so many years, 50 years or something like that. I've never seen a drop of snow in Los Angeles, not one single snowfall or nothing. Now you can go outside of Los Angeles in a place called, I don't know if you know about Big Bear. Have you ever heard of that? Or Lake Arrowhead? It's up in the mountains. It's only about less than an hour from where I'm sitting right now,
Okay.
but you will find snow up there.
Yeah.
But not down here, not in the valley, not in Los Angeles and Orange County proper, where all the people live. No, it's never been any snow.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is funny. That is a good example. That is very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, another thing, I have all kinds of things here. One of the things that I liked years ago, Paul in his writings in the New Testament, again in that 1 Corinthians 15, he talks about seeds. You know, you take a seed, a corn, you know what a little corn seed looks like. It's a body in its own way. It doesn't crawl around or anything like a caterpillar, but it is a body, and you put it into the ground, you bury it just like a cemetery. You put it in the ground, and lo and behold, a 6-foot corn plant comes up. You know, which is an amazing thing when you think about it. You take a tomato seed, put it into the ground, and you get a tomato plant. You take a rose bush, put the rose seed into the ground, up comes a rose bush. It doesn't come up. It doesn't support the idea that we have more than one life form, that, you know, you're going to die and then there'll be another you and then another you and then another you. Just one rose seed produces one rose plant. That's you. So I was always very impressed by this. I have a sheet. One of my models is this one here, and it's just basically tells you what I just told you. You put the seed into the ground, that's like being buried, and then up comes the corn plant, which is like us in the resurrection. So you have the death and resurrection again. But that was always something that impressed me, and that's. But I used other things too. For example, in this section, I have a history of plants, and it goes something like this. You start off in the ocean. You can see way down here, 3,500 million years ago. You have single-celled algae in the ocean. Eventually, the algae it gets a little bigger. It gets stringy. You know, it's not single-celled anymore. I forgot what the terminology is. It just skips my mind. But then eventually, about a billion years ago, moss appears on the land. Moss doesn't have any true roots or any stem. It basically has. You don't have to wait until you get to about the appearance of ferns about 400 million years ago. Ferns have roots and they have stems and they have leaves, but the ferns have to stay close to water too. So they're not true land plants. You get down, you have to get to flowering plants that have seeds. And you get eventually to trees, and you're getting up off the ground now. You're getting into the sky, and you got insects and you got birds that carry the seeds all over the planet. And So you go from the water onto the land, into the air, and the idea is that you'll end up in heaven. So it's a kind of, the history of plants is kind of like a sign of resurrection, is what I'm trying to say. It's one of the models I used on in the book. I don't know. Did I get that? I'm not too good at this job here. Illustrate. Oh, let's go. I guess we don't want to wait. We want to go skip along a little bit. Let's get into animals here. I'll give you a couple examples of the thing. I also did the same thing with animals. Animals have a history too on the planet. You start off. Well, I don't know if you want to get into all of that. It's very complicated. It takes too long. Here's one that you. This one here is a little clearer. Here it's a little simpler. You start off down at the bottom with one-cell creatures, starfish, 600 million years ago. You got fish, 500 million years ago. Then you get animals that get onto land, amphibians. They have to stay near water. Then you get into warm lands. Reptiles will go into warm lands. Mammals with hair and warm blood and can go into cold. They can live everywhere on the planet, essentially. And then birds populate the air. And lastly, man is in space. And the idea is that we're moving off the planet. We're moving not necessarily from the bottom of the ocean to the outer space. We're moving off the planet. That's the whole idea here. And it's a sign of resurrection. We're
headed to Mars, aren't we? Headed to Mars now?
Well, that's what they say. I wonder what good it's going to do to get there. I mean, living in a box, you can't breathe oxygen. I don't know. I don't know. Sometimes things work out and surprise me. I hope that's right. Let me see. I'll give you a couple of one. Okay, we talked about butterflies, which are interesting. One thing, honeybees help us with 30% of our food plants that we use as human beings. And a lot of people don't know that honeybees actually have two bodies also. There's a grub body inside. You see that second picture, there's a grub body of a honeybee. And before it transforms into the adult body, the one we think of as the flying body of the honeybee. And I mentioned the fact that there are 12,000 different kinds of bees, different species of bees that go through this. But anyway, inside the hive, the worker bees will put a top on the cell, on the grub cell, before it transforms into the adult phase. It's kind of like a butterfly. It's a little bit different, but not too much different. But anyway, you have the same structure from of moving out from one body into the next body. So that's a honeybee. And of
course, everyone's favorite in the springtime around here are frogs, because we go and get the tadpoles.
Well, yeah, that's the one. Okay, we'll skip over to frogs. I used to always catch bullfrogs. There are like I mentioned in here, there are 800 different kinds of frogs that have been identified species-wide. They do all have the same basic structure. They have a tadpole body with a mouth and eyes, and they have a tail to move around, breathing pore on their bodies. And like a bullfrog, it will live like a tadpole for about 2 years. And then in a period of 10 days, it transforms from the tadpole body into the frog body. We used to catch these back in Wisconsin. When I was a little boy, we used to catch them. And so I was always interested in bullfrogs. And I used to work at a restaurant in Madison. It was a really fancy restaurant. And we would cook frogs' legs. They actually were on the menu. You could order frogs' legs. But here's a frog that a lot of people don't know about. You ever heard of this frog? The wood frog. The wood frog is actually a frog that lives in North America, but it's not well known. But what is interesting about this frog, from October to March, it actually is frozen, literally solid frozen. It has no heartbeat. and no breath for 4 months. And yet in the springtime, it's back. Now that's amazing, don't you think?
It is amazing.
That's good, Frog. You can Google this and they'll tell you more about it. But that's an interesting one right there. That's death and resurrection. It's about as close as I can get to it, or want to get to it right now. Anyway, let's see what else I got here for you. Oh, well, turtles. I have this friend Richard, who he's a friend of mine, and
I live on a pond, so we see a lot of frogs and turtles, and it does freeze in the winter.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean you can walk across your pond?
Yeah, but also the critters. I mean, the frogs and the turtles are pretty buried down in the mud.
Well, that's it. That's what
Yeah.
this sheet here is about. He couldn't figure out why there were no turtles in the winter months, And the fact is, they're down in there in the mud, like literally hibernating. That's what they do.
Yep.
And then the next spring they're up again and back at it. So anyway, so let's see if there's anything else I want to show you here. Chipmunks, one of my favorite. I used to catch chipmunks up when I go up to Lake Louise up in Banff, Lake Louise in Canada. There are a lot of chipmunks up there. Anyway, chipmunks like that. They hibernate too. Oh, and I should mention bears. I like bears. Here's one on my sheet on bears. Bears hibernate. They don't tend to be fully hibernated. It's not the kind of thing you want to walk in if a bear is sleeping in the middle of winter and tap him on the shoulder, because he might just wake up and attack you, But they do sleep during the winter months pretty much. I have one on the polar bear. The polar bear mother actually has her babies in the middle of winter when she's sleeping. And when she wakes up, the babies are ready to go. They're ready to.
Amazing.
Yeah, isn't it amazing?
Yeah.
Anyway, this sheet here shows you, shows you the structure of how the polar bear works. And the winter months, the season of death is the winter when they're hibernating, and then the next spring they wake up and they have new life, and the new life is their babies, and the fact that they're still with us.
It's amazing. It's amazing to see everything wake up in the spring when you live in a place where you really get deep, full winter.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. I lived. I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin. I was there over 20 years, and I came out to visit my uncle who's lived out here in Los Angeles. He asked me to come out one summer. I started working for him. He had a plumbing business, and then I started going to college out here. Took a couple of courses in college, and one thing led to another, and I never got out. I never went back to Madison, but my kids are out here, so I'm pretty well locked in now. But
Yep.
anyway, here's another one that all ladies would appreciate. Going through a pregnancy and having the baby is like an experience of death. It's not quite like death because you're awake, but it is a very traumatic time. I remember. When my first daughter was born, I went in to see my wife who was in labor, and I did not want to have that experience after seeing her. Yeah. So, and then of course you have new life when you come out. It's a sign of resurrection. It's not only you are that okay, but you have a new, completely new human being, which is an extraordinary example, I think, of resurrection. So
For sure.
yeah. So there's another one is hunger. We also all have experienced hunger, and most of us haven't experienced hunger like some people in the eastern parts of the planet, where you're really hungry. You know what I mean? And for days on end, that kind of a thing. But all of us have experienced enough hunger to know that it's a death-like experience if you're really hungry. You know what I mean? And having a nice meal is a resurrection-like experience. Get you back feeling good and everything starts working properly again. I had I did one on cataracts, and you know, as your eyes get older and you're cloudy, you can't see anymore. It's like a death, you go blind, and then they take out your cataracts and put in plastic lenses, and you're back to seeing again, which is a sign of resurrection too. It's another model. It's one of the models I thought of as I was going through this kind of thing. Here's this is an insight one. Insight. Those pictures that you see there, I paid a student of mine $10 to draw those pictures. I couldn't draw them. I think he did a good job.
He did.
Yeah. So the first picture shows the guy, you know, everything's fine. You understand things. Everything's going fine. Then something happens and you got something you can't understand. And gets down to where you're just at the bottom of your barrel. You can't figure it out. It's just a dead end. It's like a sign of death. And then finally you have insight. You ever read Lonergan's book on insight?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, Bernard Lonergan, and he wrote a book on insight. It's a very famous book. It's a brilliant book, actually.
I know the name, yeah, but I have not read the book.
Yeah. Well, I got lots of different things here.
Well, it's a wonderful book. It had, like you said, there's so many different things in it. One of my favorites is, you know, moving from practicing something to perfection, moving from boredom to an activity.
Right.
And
a good
then
book.
Sickness and recovering. There was a number of them that were just wonderful. And then the whole experience of love and forgiveness as things that move us from sort of stillness or death to like a newness of life.
Right. It doubles our life.
Yeah.
A love relationship. It's a way of saying it doubles your life, your power. Anyway, here's one on raising people from the dead. This is the medical community. And I have 1842, the discovery of pain-killing drugs, which allowed for long operations. And then germ theory disease, 1845, when they figured out that germs cause a lot of human diseases. 1865, germ-free surgery. Discovery of, actually that date is wrong. I don't know why. It's actually later date. The right date is about 1894. Actually, I got 1884 on the discovery of vaccines. And then x-rays in 1895, the Röntgen, penicillin in 1928, and the heart-lung machine in 1954. All of these inventions have helped doctors raise people from the dead, literally, and increase the longevity of each human being on the planet, which is a sign of resurrection. I mean, we still have to face death, but like I said, there's all these signs of hope around us. Getting well after being sick, you fall down, an older person falls down, hurts themselves. A few days later, a week later, they're back on their feet. They're okay again. They're healed up. You know what I mean? Sign of resurrection. There's all these different things. So
these signs should give us comfort and hope for the ultimate resurrection. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. That's why I was hoping that this book would get in every gift shop and every hospital in the United States. So, I mean, because people who are depressed, they need signs of hope, signs of resurrection. This gives them a lot of things to think about.
Right.
And if you're dealing with a very serious medical problem, you need something to give you hope for that too. And if a doctor tells you that you've got 2 months to live or 6 months to live, well, that'll help you move in that direction that you were just mentioning, the fact that we're all going to die. And so I'd like these books to help people, to give them hope. That's the whole idea. And
well, it's a delightful book, and I think it will give people hope. There's so many examples from our everyday life, like you said, and things that we love out in nature.
Yeah.
Just so many everyday experiences in which we find these signs of hope and signs that this isn't all there is, that there's
Right. It's all pointing toward that direction, that we're moving on, that we have bigger and better things that God has planned for us. In the last section of the book, I deal with Christ, and I included a couple things. One is his walking on the water. It's always been, somebody said, well, he didn't walk on the water. The water actually was ice. He walked on ice. I remember I heard that when I was a kid. I thought, oh my God, this guy's really crazy. But anyway, walking on the water shows that he has power over water. And we have a lot of water in our bodies. And that always struck me as interesting, you know. And then I included that in that section on Christ as just an example of his power over water, because our bodies are so much made out of water. And then I also have an example of his raising the widow's son. The widow's son, you know, she's a widow. She has only one son. And he took pity on her and raised this guy from the dead. He was going to the graveyard at the time. It's in Luke 7, chapter 7 in Luke. And so I included that one. And then, of course, I included the resurrection of Christ himself as a way of explaining to us in his own terms how this works and where we're ultimately heading in the direction of our life. So that's the story pretty much. I think we just about run out of time, haven't we? We're getting close.
So I'm just curious, there's a lot of science obviously connected with this book. Is that your background? Or
well, I have an undergraduate science major, and I've always been interested in science. A lot of this stuff I think came from the fact that I taught in public schools for over 30 years. And I wanted to make my classes relevant to the students. I taught a lot of history. I did teach other things during the Vietnam War. I taught math and science, as a matter of fact, so I didn't have to go to shoot people in Vietnam, you know. But I did mostly. I have almost a doctorate in history, and the books in history are unusual now. They're filled primarily with wars and politics, the history of wars and history of politics. There's hardly anything on the history of technology and hardly anything on the history of science. Kids use watch the television set every day. They don't know where it came from. They listen to the radio. They used to carry boom boxes around, you know, the radios. They don't know where the radio came from. Now they have cell phones. They don't know where they came from. Ask them where the internet comes from. I'll bet you won't get an answer that makes any sense. So I always taught. I wrote a couple of books while I was teaching, literally, because the information I wanted to teach my students was not in the books, a lot of it. So in order to complement the books, I would write the history of the radio, the history of the television. I did hundreds of those sheets and would give them to my students, and it would be part of their workload. And so that's where a lot of these, oh, and I also wanted to teach about God. I don't believe that God should be kept out of the public school. I used to teach, I did a lot of these things I actually taught in my classroom. Some of them I taught literally would talk to the kids about. Others I actually produced sheets that I gave them that some people might think that are too religious, you know, and they might have been a little bit more religious than normal, but a lot of these I conceived of when I was teaching. So that's the background story. I think the fact that I started seeing these signs of resurrection and writing them down came from my work that over the period of 3 or 4 or 5 decades, you know.
Wonderful.
So that's the answer to your question.
Well, the book is wonderful. I think it will bring hope. It's Signs of Resurrection. You want to hold it up there once more so we can
Well,
see
the one
it
that
on the cover.
this is the one that you can buy on Amazon.com. It's well worth anybody's time, I think, to just look at all the different models. Not because I wrote the book. These models are God's models. He created these things. I just recorded them. I was like a newspaper reporter. You know what I mean? I'm reporting them, but basically they don't belong to me. They're really something that God Himself put into our world, and I just collected them and put them into a little simple book. And you can buy this on Amazon.com. So
Great. So it's there. I recommend it. It's very interesting, very different than other books that I've gone through. And thank you for being here today and for writing the book and getting it all put together.
Well, thank you for, I'm happy that you like the book, and thanks for interviewing me. I appreciate it. And nice meeting you, by the way.
Nice meeting you too. How about, would you like to end us with a prayer?
Well, we could just say an Our Father, which pretty well summarizes our whole life, doesn't it? In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen.
Amen. Thank you very much. I wish you a lot of luck with the book. And like I said, it's a beautiful book with wonderful signs that are all around us.
Yeah,
signs of
they're all around us.
resurrection. Yeah. So thank you.